In the headlines, leaders of Korea's political parties make nice on this Wednesday and compromise on key pending issues, including the idea of reforming the pension program for government workers. President Park Geun-hye expresses hope for ASEAN's greater role in ending North Korea's nuclear programs as South Korea is set to host a two-day special summit with ASEAN leaders. And a U.S. Senate report reveals that CIA torture of Al-Qaeda suspects was far more brutal than acknowledged without producing useful intelligence. Welcome to the program. You're watching Primetime News, coming to you live from Seoul. I am Kang Tae-ri.
And I'm Sean Lim. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. Let's begin with national politics, where rival party leaders came to some compromises on pending legislation centering on economic revitalization and anti-corruption measures.
Our Ji Myung-kil has more on the dash by lawmakers to fulfill their campaign pledges and move the country forward.
The leaders of Korea's two main rival parties had much to discuss at Wednesday's meeting. They settled a number of differences, first and foremost agreeing that their top priority should be economic revitalization. Considering that real estate accounts for more than 80% of the nation's total wealth, lawmakers decided to pass revised real estate bills at the next plenary session slated for the end of this month. The move is intended to curb inflation in the real estate market and to lessen the financial risks for renters and home buyers. For more than a decade, Korea has been trying to address its growing pension deficit that stems from problems with the current pension system for public servants. The two parties agreed Wednesday to establish a pan-national body to gain social consensus on the issue. Public servants have shown fierce resistance to the Saenuri Party's proposed pension reform bill since it was drafted in late October. While the bill aims to secure pension funds for future generations, it requires public servants to pay more into the system while giving them less in return starting in 2016. In addition, the two parties agreed to a parliamentary audit of a recent defense industry corruption scandal. If the results of a current investigation led by prosecutors is deemed unsatisfactory. Last month, the government launched a probe into growing allegations of bribery between military officials and defense firms. Leaders of the rival parties also agreed to discuss other unsettled matters at a later date, such as opening a parliamentary audit of the controversial $20 billion project to refurbish the country's four major rivers carried out under the former Ji Myung-bak administration. Ji Myung-kil, Arirang News.
A major state-run think tank has revised down Korea's growth forecast for this year and next. The Korea Development Institute forecast 3.4% of growth for this year, down from the earlier projection of 3.7%. Next year's projection was also cut from 3.8% to 3.5%. The institute cites sluggish domestic demand and uncertainties overseas for the revision. They also mentioned that export growth is slowing because shipments to China and the EU are starting to lose steam. Falling prices and an aging society here in Korea have prompted many economists to draw parallels with Japan, which has suffered from decades of lost growth. Experts say if Korea wants to avoid the fate of its neighbor, it needs to speed up structural reforms before it's too late. Song Ju-sun tells us more.
Several key economic indicators, though more than 2 decades apart, are strikingly similar. For Japan, it was 1989 when growth slowed to the 0% range, shortly before becoming an aging society. It's like déjà vu across the East Sea. Korea's fertility rate, the average number of children a woman has in her lifetime, has hovered around 1.2 in the past 4 years. That's well below the threshold of 2.1 needed to maintain the current population level. The poor fertility rate comes at a time Korea is being hit by the double whammy of low growth and a rapidly aging population. If Korea does follow the footsteps of Japan and enter a long-term slump, it's expected to take a harder blow than Japan did. That's because Korea's pension program and safety nets are not as comprehensive as Japan's were. Retirees and those preparing for their later years will cut back in spending, in turn fueling deflation and creating a vicious cycle. Economists say to prevent a long-term recession, reforms are needed, especially in the labor and manufacturing sectors. The government will also have to seek more flexible and efficient policies.
The reason Japan could not counter a recession was that their measures were too short-sighted. In order not to follow Japan's footsteps, Korea's reform and restructuring must be aimed at securing growth engines in the long term, which could raise its growth potential.
To realize that potential, economists say priority must be given to creating more jobs for the younger generation before extending the retirement age. Experts point out that Korea has one competitive edge at the moment. Its asset bubble is not as severe as Japan's. But they say reforms are needed now and needed quickly. 송지선, Arirang News.
Amid the ongoing controversy over what many are calling the Korean Air nut rage incident, Jo Hyun-ah, vice president of the nation's flagship airline and the CEO's daughter, has officially called it quits. Initially, she just stepped down from her duties related to flight services, but with the public still in an uproar, she offered her full resignation. Connie Lee has more on the nut rage fallout.
Korean Air's Vice President Jo Hyun-ah officially offered to resign late Wednesday, and her seat on the company's board of directors is to be determined. This comes after she stepped down from all her posts related to Korean Air flight services on Tuesday, amid all the controversy. She has been the center of public attention these days. Local papers and social media networks poke fun with Jo Hyun-ah and her nut rage, making her star in some cartoons and drawings. Take a look at this mock-up poster of Nut Air, an homage to one Hollywood movie. The infamous incident took place last Friday. Cho made a flight from New York to Seoul, turned back to the gate when a flight attendant, apparently not following protocol, served her nuts in the bag instead of on a plate. Citizens took to social media to express their anger, especially since she initially didn't resign from her post. This act shows her sense of entitlement, said one, while another called her actions like that of an emperor's daughter. There are others who are calling this incident an international disgrace. Maybe so. This nutty incident made international headlines and even got a Japanese cartoon drawing of a mock-up of what happened inside the plane. The 40-year-old eldest daughter of Korean Air chairman Cho Yang-ho has apologized, but this might not evade her from legal action. The Korean government is currently investigating if her actions broke air traffic safety laws or any regulations. Connie Lee, Arirang News.
The two-day ASEAN-Korea summit will begin in the southeastern port city of Busan tomorrow, and ahead of the commemoration of the 25th anniversary of ties, President Park says ASEAN can be of great help in Korea's unification efforts.
In her comments carried in newspapers in the Southeast Asian countries, she said this is because the 10 ASEAN member bloc has diplomatic relations with both South and North Korea, while adding that a unified Korea would contribute to peace across East Asia as well. And in particular focus, South Korea is expected to call for help in dealing with North Korea's nuclear programs at this week's ASEAN summit.
But it may not be a request answered directly. Hwang Sung-yi reports on how ties to China and the U.S. may complicate matters.
When it comes to diplomatic cooperation, South Korea and the ASEAN countries are at a clash of interest. South Korea is seeking support for its efforts to counter North Korea's nuclear weapons program, but its Southeast Asian partners are hesitant since the issue already involves the big powers like the United States and China. The ASEAN nations want Seoul to stand on their side in the South China Sea maritime dispute against Beijing, something that could shake up South Korea's relations with China. All this will be up for discussion when President Park Geun-hye meets the leaders of 10 ASEAN countries in Busan later this week. The Korea-ASEAN Commemorative Summit will be another occasion for dialogue among the middle power nations, along with the ASEAN Regional Forum and the ASEAN Plus 3. Since the 10 nations attending the upcoming summit have diplomatic ties with both Koreas, they could play a unique role on the Korean peninsula.
By explaining the situation on the Korean peninsula from our point of view and making the ASEAN countries aware, they can act as a bridge between South and North Korea. They can also indirectly deliver their objective perspective on certain issues concerning Pyongyang.
And since Southeast Asian countries, namely Thailand and Laos, are one of the most taken routes for North Korean defectors, cooperation on that issue could be one of the informal agenda items at the upcoming meeting. Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News.
And as Korea and ASEAN are searching for solid middle ground on sensitive political matters, economic ties have been consistently flourishing.
And many expect this week's gathering to boost that economic relation to the next level. Our Hwang Ji has the details.
Despite the slumping global economy, Korea's trade volume with ASEAN has been on a steady rise, thanks to a free trade agreement between the two parties and the Korean wave that boosted demand for Korean products and services. Since 2007, after a free trade deal went into effect, the trade volume between Korea and ASEAN rose more than 11% on average every year and exceeded the $100 billion mark for the first time in 2011. ASEAN now stands as Korea's second largest trading partner following China. But when looking at their economic relationship in the longer term, experts point out the excessive trade surplus that Korea is recording with the Southeast Asian group.
The huge trade deficit ASEAN is posting with Korea will become a thorny issue as both parties try to strengthen their economic cooperation. The trade imbalance will have to be resolved down the road.
The ASEAN Economic Community that's set to be established next year, however, is expected to become a new opportunity for Korea to further expand ties. The community aims to achieve regional economic integration with a single market and production base, making it easier for Korean companies to do business there. During the two-day summit in Busan, Asian leaders will also lay out a blueprint for cooperation and set a new goal of increasing trading volume to $200 billion by 2020. Hwang Ji, Arirang News.
Getting a head start to the ASEAN-Korea Commemorative Summit, President Park Geun-hye and her Vietnamese counterpart announced the conclusion of their free trade agreement.
Now, this comes after more than 2 years of negotiations, and on top of Korea's free trade agreement with the ASEAN, this deal with Vietnam is expected to bring benefits for Korea's small and mid-sized companies. Our Choi Yoo-sun sends this report from Busan.
The concluding of Korea's free trade agreement with Vietnam may not seem like a big deal, considering the 7-year-old Korea-ASEAN FTA, but it's expected to help Korean small and mid-sized firms increase their exports to the Southeast Asian nation. Vietnam will remove tariffs on 200 additional products from Korea, including auto parts and cosmetics, many of which are manufactured by SMEs. Hanoi has also agreed to simplify its rules of origin and customs clearance, allowing textile and garments made in the inter-Korean Kaesang Industrial Complex to benefit from the simplified process. Seoul will open its market for nearly 500 additional Vietnamese goods, while excluding sensitive agricultural products such as rice, fresh garlic, and ginger. Korean companies specializing in tires and cotton anticipate boosting price competitiveness against their Japanese rivals in Vietnam. Compared to Tokyo's FTA with Hanoi, Korea has secured liberalization of more goods entering Vietnam, 2 percentage points higher in terms of import value. Considering Vietnam is Korea's #1 investment destination in Southeast Asia, the two sides have also bolstered protective measures for their respective investors.
Although the FTA with Vietnam will have a relatively limited effect on the domestic economy, it's expected to help Korea in joining regional trade networks such as the China-led FTAAP. It's also expected to speed up negotiations for two-way deals with other ASEAN members to increase Korean businesses' usage of the trade pact. 최유선, Arirang News, Busan.
And on to another event ahead of the Korea-ASEAN summit. President Park Geun-hye sat down with her Malaysian counterpart on this Wednesday.
During talks with Prime Minister Najib Razak at the presidential office, the Korean president spoke highly of Malaysia's reform and development initiatives. She also referred to Korea's past participation in Malaysia's infrastructure projects. This comes as Seoul is seeking to win bids in a highway project that would link the Southeast Asian nation with Singapore. This week's summit won't be all work and no play because it's not just the leaders of the 10 ASEAN member countries who are in Korea this week for the commemorative summit.
That's right. The representative landmarks of their respective countries are more or less making a visit as well. Our Park Geun-hye tells us more.
These lighted installation art pieces are called the Jewels of ASEAN, with each representing a landmark in each of the 10 ASEAN member countries. From the magnificent Sultan Omar Ali Saifuddin Mosque in Brunei to the famous Buddhist site of Sheragan Pagoda in Myanmar, the replicas are set up at Gwanghwamun Square, facing Korea's landmark Gyeongbokgung Palace. They symbolize the rich cultures and values of the ASEAN countries.
We are the traveler from Thailand and we are happy to see our landmark from Thailand. It's Wat Arun. It's a representative temple in Thailand, very popular in Thailand.
The exhibition was organized to celebrate the beginning of the two-day ASEAN-Korea summit that starts Thursday in the southeastern port city of Busan.
Each embassy of the respective ASEAN countries designated their representative landmark. They symbolize each member country's cultural heritage, their history, and their future. We hope the project facilitates a deeper understanding of ASEAN countries among the Korean public.
During the exhibition period, a tourism booth will provide visitors information on popular tourist destinations in ASEAN member countries. Fun events like quiz competitions are in store as well. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
The U.S. Senate report on how CIA agents handled terror suspects following the September 11th attacks is finally out, revealing the extent of the agency's extreme interrogation techniques.
To tell us more, we turn to Paul Yee at the News Center. Paul, there's been a firestorm of public outrage around the world over this declassified report. What were some of the main points?
Well, the controversial report contains details and graphic accounts of what critics have described as torture tactics, methods that were ineffective in attaining useful information. This as United Nations and human rights groups have condemned the treatment of detainees as a violation of international law, while calling for the criminal prosecution of U.S. officials. Our Shin Se-min has the latest.
Forced nudity, waterboarding, sleep deprivation, and being chained down in makeshift dungeons. It sounds like something out of a horror movie, but it was reality for suspected Al-Qaeda operatives following the 9/11 attacks in the United States. These were the heavy-handed tactics carried out by members of the Central Intelligence Agency.
Detainees were often subject to harsh and brutal interrogation and treatment because CIA analysts believe, often in error, that they knew more information than what they had provided.
The summary of a report released Tuesday by the U.S. Senate Intelligence Committee shows that the CIA's interrogation methods far more brutal than previously disclosed and that the agency was misleading Americans about what it was doing. It also found that the methods weren't even effective. Dismissing CIA claims the interrogation techniques had helped to secure information that eventually led to the killing of Al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden, the report says that piece of information was obtained before detainees were systematically tortured. The Senate Intelligence Committee also found that at least 26 of the CIA's estimated 119 detainees were wrongfully held. Known as rendition, detention, and interrogation, the interrogation program lasted until 2007. CIA Director John Brennan, in response to the Senate report, admitted that missteps were made. He said the agency had learned from its mistakes, but also took issue with the report's characterization that the detention and interrogation program was ineffective. Brennan said the interrogations produced intelligence that helped thwart attack plans, capture terrorists, and save lives. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
And shifting to China, the country's inflation rate has hit its lowest point in 5 years, raising expectations that Beijing will inject further stimulus into the slowing economy. The National Bureau of Statistics said Wednesday that Chinese consumer prices grew 1.4% in November compared to a year earlier, climbing at the slowest pace since 2009. Meanwhile, the Producer Price Index recorded its 33rd straight monthly decline, marking the biggest fall since last year. The trend is likely to lower export prices coming out of China, which is making it harder for companies to service their debts. This as economic growth fell to a 5-year low this past quarter at 7.3% on year. And finally, turning to more industry news, the smartphone-based car service Uber has been banned in yet another string of countries, this time in Spain and Thailand. On Tuesday, a Spanish judge ruled in favor of the Madrid Taxi Association that argued that the ride-sharing services amounted to unfair competition by drivers not authorized to provide cab services. In Thailand, the government said Uber's credit card system did not comply with rules and that its drivers were not insured nor registered to drive for-profit vehicles. Despite the fierce opposition, the majority of investors believe the ride-sharing service is here to stay. Uber picked up $1.2 billion this past round of funding this past week, pushing its valuation to $40 billion. And that wraps up our look at international stories for now. I'll see you back here tomorrow night.
Hello and welcome. I'm Stephen Che with Wednesday's Sports Rundown. Kicking off with football overseas. La Liga powerhouse Real Madrid have been unbeatable in their recent form. They picked up their 19th win in a row, a new Spanish record. It came from their final Champions League group match against Ludogorets, which they won easily 4-0. Now, the streak started on September 16th, and from then on, Real steamrolled their opponents in all competitions, scoring 3.7 goals a match, or 71 total goals while giving up just 9. Cristiano Ronaldo was the key cog there, netting 26 goals alone. Now, the Whites face Almeria on Friday in the final league match of the year before heading out to the FIFA Club World Cup in Morocco from December 16th. Now off to the games of the night. First up to the KBL. The Mobis Phoebus faced off against the KT Sonic Boom in Ulsan. And Mobis breezed by KT in their last two meetings, but faced stiffer competition here. It's a back-and-forth fight to the last second, but thanks to Moon Tae-young's scoring prowess, Mobis picks up another win to protect their top spot on the standings. And over in Incheon, the ET Land Elephants took the win from the Dongbu Promi late in the game to notch their second win in a row. And heading to the V-League, first to the ladies. In Seongnam, the Korea Expressway Zenith took on the Hunguk Life Pink Spiders. And the Pink Spiders make it a 1-2-1 safety net before the Zenith tie it all up. But they weave their way through the fifth set to earn their fourth straight victory. And over in Ansan, the OK Savings Bank Russian cash in a win from the Korean Air Jumbos. They break open a bag of macadamias as they take the 5-set match. And finally, Facebook's 2014 Year in Review, which breaks down the year's top trending issues, featured the Brazil World Cup as the #1 topic across the globe. Players and teams, as well as fans and regular folks, posted vigorously about the tournament, making it Facebook's most trending topic in history. As for athletes, NBA star LeBron James topped the list for his homecoming to the Cleveland Cavaliers. Meanwhile, the biggest topic in Korea was figure skater Ji Myung-kil, who retired after winning the Olympic silver medal in Sochi in a controversial judging decision. And that's all I have for now. Stay tuned for the weather up next. Have a great night.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Kim Bo-kyung with your weather updates. Well, sporadic showers are falling in parts of the central regions while Gangwon-do province is getting some snow. It looks like flurries will continue through tomorrow. About a centimeter will fall here in the capital, and it looks like up to 5 centimeters is expected for Gangwon-do province. Snowy conditions may lead to icy roads in the morning, so please be careful. Other than that, some areas could get higher than normal levels of fine dust. Looking ahead, morning lows on Friday will drop to -6, while those on the western coast may be in for some heavy snowfall on Friday and Saturday. On Thursday, Seoul will mix it to 2, Gwangju reaches 6, Busan hits 11. On to other regions, Jeju reaches 10, Dokdo hits 9, Mount Kumgang remains colder. That'll do it for now. I'll see you soon.
And that's Primetime News for this Wednesday. I am Kang Chiri. Thanks for watching.
And I'm Sean Lim. Have a great evening. We'll see you soon.